Another team has dropped in the Shohei Ohtani sweepstakes expansion pack. Now we're hearing from Jeff Passan that apparently the team north of the border, the Toronto Blue Jays, is interested in acquiring Shohei services. Kyle, what do you make of the Blue Jays getting involved in this?
How about that? Toronto's going to get into the Shohei Ohtani game, but which is I've always been interested by Toronto as a team because it feels like if Shohei Ohtani goes there, it's not going to have the giant dramatic expectations. But like quietly as it's kept, Toronto has consistently been a team that's had money available at their disposal, has drafted well over the years with multiple general managers. By the way, their old general manager Alex Anthopoulos is now with the Atlanta Braves. So they've drafted well amongst multiple regimes. They've developed players. They have a superstar for a generation in Vlad Jr. I know that baseball has a new generational superstar every year, but like 3 years ago, Vlad Jr. was the shit. And now he's still there. They have young players. George Springer is still there, obviously, in the fold. But even though they have all these points, it feels like they don't have the same expectations as you might expect from a traditional contender. And if Shohei Ohtani went there, I feel like it would be just kind of nice for him, you know, like they'll be competitive every year. He'll make a bunch of money. There won't be the pressure of trying to compete. It's kind of fun that Toronto's getting in this big money baseball game, because the last time I think they were in on a big money free agent was either Hyunjin Ryu 4 years ago or George Springer 5 years ago now.
Now, there is something I want to red flag that you said, though, that non-pressure to compete. I thought that's what Shohei wanted. That's why we were talking about teams like the Rangers and the Dodgers, Braves even at one point getting involved in this. So the Blue Jays, if they're just there to kick back and sign Shohei Ohtani, is that really what he wants?
I feel like that's more the perception, right? Like the Blue Jays feel like they are there to compete. The Blue Jays feel like they have a team that's underperformed the last 2 years, and it's why they've tried every path they could find to try and make upgrades. It went from signing Hyunjin Ryu to the pitching staff to then trading for Jose Berrios to then signing Kevin Gausman, and that one actually being the best of the three options to improve their pitching staff. They've tried and tried to find ways to improve the pitching staff and to improve the bullpen, and it just hasn't worked the way they hoped it would. Obviously, they've made the playoffs a couple times, and they were a 9-1 lead away from eliminating the Seattle Mariners back in that wild card round a couple years ago. But it feels like Toronto's underperformed expectations, and no one's really like, wow, this team is such a crazy disappointment. So maybe that's just more the perception of expectation more than it is the actual expectation, because if they sign Shohei Ohtani, does that instantly make Toronto the favorites in the American League East? I don't feel like that's the case, as it might be with the other three teams or even four teams that we've mentioned so far in the Shohei Ohtani sweepstakes.
Well, that's the tough thing, obviously, about baseball. One player making a team the favorite exactly if they're not already a team with a proven track record of success, because obviously we don't see teams like the Rangers coming most years. You know, they just kind of come out of nowhere. The Blue Jays, though, they would be a better team, obviously, with Shohei. If you can keep him in a lineup that does include Vlad Guerrero Jr., as you mentioned, and Bo Bichette, there's actually been some rumors and speculation that both those guys may be on the trade market, mostly because of a comment that Mark Shapiro, their CEO and president, said that they want to keep payroll about the same as last year. Obviously, if you sign Shohei Ohtani, payroll will not be the same as last year, so you got to unload a lot more money. They're losing $59 million, but that might not be enough to cover like what you would expense having to pay Bichette, Guerrero, and Shohei Ohtani in the same lineup. You mentioned obviously Gausman is a high price free agent for them as well. They're still paying George Springer. So they do got a lot of money invested in this team. It begs the question on whether or not they can afford to stay around that same price point that they want to in their budget, while also taking on Shohei's contract. Or like, what other cuts would they have to make that happen? And would the team still be good if they did decide to make that happen? What I do find fascinating about Toronto is a unique advantage that they have in theory over every other team in the MLB. They're the only game in town for the country of Canada. That's something unique that they could definitely sell. And for an international superstar like Shohei Ohtani, I doubt that he would have some of the reservations when it comes to having to go north of the border. He doesn't care. He's already out of country as is to play whatever team is offering the most money. In theory, he should be okay with. Now, again, this goes into that whole East Coast, West Coast team that we've been talking about as well. Toronto, obviously, we know they're well within the AL East. So that would be a change of some of the preferences that we've learned from Shohei Ohtani and talked about in previous videos. But I do think that they are a fascinating contender. And hey, Rogers Center, we know what that could do for hitters. We know that hitters blow up when they go Rogers Center. Jose Bautista, that 3-year run whenever he went to the Rogers Center is one of my favorite. Hey, he gets more games at Yankee Stadium each year. So the hitter Shohei would love going to Toronto, I think.
I feel like there's a interesting trend developing in the Ohtani sweepstakes, because now the three teams that are most at the front of the line for Ohtani happen to be in 3 of the 5 largest media markets, or like markets in terms of size of population in Major League Baseball, being obviously Los Angeles with the Dodgers, Dallas, Texas with the Rangers, and now Toronto with the Blue Jays. And I think that's interesting because you mentioned that the Blue Jays potentially wanting to slash payroll, and the Blue Jays potentially being interested in cutting back some salary, whether that means trading Alejandro Kirk or trading Bo Bichette. Obviously,
I want to clarify, not cut back payroll, but keep it about the same.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah. Obviously, last offseason, they did exactly that when they traded away Lourdes Gurriel Jr. right before he was coming up on arbitration in exchange for Dalton Varsho. And while Dalton Varsho is a really good defensive player, I think that's going to go down as one of the worst trades of last offseason for Major League Baseball, because Lourdes Gurriel went to Arizona, immediately blew up into not just a better player, but also a phenomenon with the purple hair and everything that made him exciting. And the Diamondbacks went to the World Series. But also, like, Toronto's in an interesting position because Shohei Ohtani prints money, right? This is the whole thing that the Angels were getting out of it, is like, well, we might not get trade value back for him, but we'll also be printing money for as long as he plays for this team because of the attention that comes to him. And it makes sense why he'd be interested in going to one of these larger media markets, as opposed to, say, well, I shouldn't say San Francisco, because San Francisco is a larger media market, but they've chosen 3 of the 5 largest cities in Major League Baseball by which to move forward. And I think that's interesting if those are truly the 3 favorites that are interested, because I trust Jeff Passan's information on this. Very little has been leaked out around this story. And, you know, if the Dodgers and Rangers are consistently at the top, we know those teams are the front runners. But if we're going to go so far as to say the Blue Jays have a legitimate chance, maybe it's just to drive up the value, or maybe there's a real possibility that Ohtani ends up in a surprise destination after all.
It is interesting, the teams that kind of disappeared over the course of this speculation. The Giants, like, I feel like after the first week, I haven't heard much about them, but Giants fans and Giants Twitter is still very much talking about him. The Braves seem to completely fallen off of the map in this discussion. The Chicago Cubs, we heard the report that they're going to offer a very lucrative deal, but other than that, haven't heard much from them. And then the New York teams, you talk about getting into some of the biggest media markets, haven't heard anything from the New York teams or publicly putting out there. The speculation has mostly been from the sports books as far as putting those teams in there as far as top 5 contenders for Shohei's services. And Boston, it really was just one report, and that was it. So I think that the fact that the Blue Jays are very vocal in it is huge. Again, this could be very much the Kawhi run for the Toronto Raptors. We saw that the entire country of Canada banded together to support Kawhi Leonard after they won that championship. So that could be a selling point. If you're Shapiro and you're trying to sign Shohei Ohtani, I would just say, you know, hey, let's put this photo out there of Kawhi with those like crowds of people in his sunglasses holding a championship. That's the vision. That's what you could do. Is there any drawbacks to Shohei potentially having to learn French, though, going to Canada?
Toronto isn't necessarily in the French part of Canada, but a couple phrases will do you good, right? Ohtani already is balancing 2 different languages as it stands living in America. So throwing a third in there sounds pretty spicy. You mentioned some of the teams who aren't in the running anymore. I told you the Cubs were just going to get in there just for the sake of saying that they were in on the Ohtani game. The Cubs wanted their name out there and then just vanished from the conversations so that their fan base wouldn't get upset at them. Giants, like we joked, we've seen this story before for the Giants, right? We've seen the Giants try and get involved in a big money free agent. There was never a world where the Dodgers, with their infinite resources and giant television contracts, were going to let the Giants get into a bidding war against them. The Giants have just faded from the conversation, just like we expected. And the Red Sox were never a serious contender to actually land Ohtani because the Red Sox are in last place and bringing in a new president of baseball ops and a team that is probably a couple years away from consistently contending. I know they made the league championship series a year ago, but consistently being at the top of the league is probably a stretch for Boston at this point. So those teams faded away, and it wasn't the craziest stretch to see those teams fading away. Because like we said from the beginning, it was Dodgers and Rangers were the two. Those are the two that make the most sense. They're consistently linked to. And I think at the end of all of this is a pretty good chance it'll be one of those two teams.
All right, guys. Well, Blue Jays now in on Shohei Ohtani. What does this mean for the free agency sweepstakes for the two-way superstar? I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on all our social medias. From Juju and Kyle, stay safe, happy, and healthy. We'll see you next time.